A share buyback is where a company purchases its own shares from a shareholder, and commonly a company would look to carry out a share buyback to return value to its shareholders, to increase earnings per share, or to provide an exit route for shareholders. There are a number of key requirements for a share buyback for a non-traded private limited company. The company's shareholders must approve the buyback. The shares being repurchased must be fully paid. Consideration for the buyback must be paid in cash at the time of the purchase. The buyback must be financed out of distributable reserves, the proceeds of an issue of new shares or as capital. And following the buyback, the shares must be cancelled or financed out of distributable reserves held in treasury. Each requirement must be met, and the common errors we see in illegal share buybacks tend to be around shareholder approval and the purchase price. A company's shareholders need to approve the terms of the buyback before the agreement is entered into. This means that the share buyback agreement will need to be circulated to the company's shareholders, and the shareholders need to approve the terms of the agreement before the purchase can be completed. Seeking shareholder approval after the agreement has been entered into is too late and renders the buyback void. Another common mistake is not seeking shareholder approval, as this isn't usually required for share transfers. A buyback needs to be financed out of distributable reserves, so the company will need to have sufficient funds for it to be able to pay for the shares. If the company doesn't have sufficient profit to fund the buyback, not only will the buyback be void, but the payment will also amount to an unlawful distribution, and the recipient of the purchase price will be liable to repay this to the company. The purchase price for a buyback needs to be paid in full in cash at the time of the purchase. This means that it can't be paid in instalments, it can't be partly left outstanding as a loan, and consideration can't be deferred. Where a share buyback has been carried out illegally, it will be deemed void, meaning that the shares won't have properly transferred, and the shareholder may have to repay the company the consideration received. The directors of the company also risk committing an offence, and if found in default, could face imprisonment for up to 2 years or an unlimited fine, or both. If a company is being sold and it comes to light that a share buyback hasn't been carried out properly, this could potentially be a deal breaker, as this affects whether the shareholders purporting to sell their shares actually have title to those shares and are able to do so. Luckily, there are some fixes, and the share buyback can be rectified by carrying out the share buyback again or by carrying out a reduction of capital. The first option works best if the share buyback was relatively recent, the seller is willing, and all the requirements for a share buyback can be met. The second option is a more onerous process, but is the way to go if the share buyback was carried out a while ago and/or the seller can no longer be traced. The simplest way to carry out a reduction of capital is for the directors of the company to sign a statement of solvency and the shareholders to approve the reduction. There's also a court-approved process to reduce capital. Care should be taken when carrying out a share buyback to make sure all the requirements for a share buyback are met. If the previous share buyback hasn't been carried out properly, it would be best to try and fix this before selling your company to avoid any unnecessary issues further into the transaction process.